Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library. And I am, of course, thrilled to be here with KJ Charles, our third time with her on What's on Her TBR Pile. It's always amazing. So in the chat, please let us know where you're coming from. And I tell you a couple of things. One is we want to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for always supporting our initiatives. And I'd like to thank the Brookline Library who partnered with us on this particular program. And so if you're from the Brookline Library, welcome. I'd also like to say that you can take notes if you want. If you can't keep up with KJ, as I've never been able to do, one of the members of our romance book club, Allison, is going to be taking notes, and I will be sending those notes out to everybody in a recap after the program. Oh my goodness, people are from all over the world. This is exciting. All right, so what we're going to do is KJ is going to talk about all of the things that she's been reading lately and loving, and you can make a list so your TBR pile can fall over. If you are here, you know that KJ is one of my favorite writers. I discovered her with The Charm of Magpies, and she just told me that the book coming out, The Secret Lives of Country Gentlemen, coming out in March, has just gotten a Kirkus starred review, and that is go. I'm actually surprised that all of your books don't have starred reviews because I love them.
Well, part of it is that the book I've just done is the book that's coming out in March is the first one I've done with a traditional publisher in 5 years. And if there is a way for indie authors to get all these reviews, I haven't been bothered. So, but this one it's got starred reviews so far from Publishers Weekly and also Library Journal, which is actually, I'm not currying favour, but the fact that it's Library Journal is actually the most exciting one to me because, you know, if librarians like you, everyone likes you. I feel that's the one that matters a lot to me. So yeah, this book is really hitting the spot apparently. So I'm very happy with that.
Well, I'm going to make that into a t-shirt. If librarians like you, everyone likes you.
Yes.
Okay.
Librarian power.
Yeah. So let's get started. What have you been reading that you would like to talk about first to recommend to us?
Right, I have now my devices. I have my trusty Kobo. Yes, I'm a very heavy Kobo reader. What I'm reading at the moment, and I've only just started it, is Dalliances and Devotion by Felicia Grossman, who is a historical romance author who does a lot about Jewish people in the sort of 19th century. And this one, it's got a heroine who has been twice divorced, which is obviously quite shocking. And the hero is a Pinkerton, and there is a sort of lovers reunited thing and a mystery. I'm only like 16% into it, but I'm really enjoying it so far. So that is what I am on at the moment. And the one I just finished yesterday, which I am absolutely bouncing about, I don't know if you've read the Jeannie Lynn Lotus Palace mysteries. So these are wonderful. They're set in the Tang Dynasty. So it's like, I think, the 8th century in China. Absolutely amazing research, beautifully depicted. She's got a real talent for making it vivid, not just the setting, but the culture and the feeling. So her characters, there's a thing in historical romance that I think we're all guilty of, and I have been guilty of it myself, I know, which is you really want your characters to have all the knowledge and cleverness of the 21st century people. So, you know, your doctor doesn't bleed people and would never use leeches kind of thing. And hers don't. So her characters are really working with the technology and also the beliefs that they've got. So this one, Death of the Sorcerer, it's a novella. So she's done these 4 books set in the Penghang Li, which is like this pleasure quarter, and most of the heroines are courtesans. But one of them is a lady, and she falls in love with Gao the Knife, who is a street thug, and it is exactly as brilliant as you would think. I mean, Gao the Knife is just the best. And then he becomes a constable for love of her, and you know, it's still this massive social divide. But she is a woman who has been given an education and they get married anyway, and it's a wonderful romance in itself. But then this is a novella that just shows you a little bit about their married life. It's called Death of the Sorcerer, and Lady Bao, Gao's wife, Wei Wei, she believes in the sorcerer and she believes in the superstitions, and they are basically kind of real. so it's not a historical romance that's sneering at the past. It's a historical romance that's completely embedded in the past. So these are wonderful. Basically, if you haven't read the Jeannie Lin Ping Hang Lee mysteries, you need to just get on that right now. And she said in the epilogue that she was considering writing a series of mysteries about Gao and Wei Wei, and I would literally pay like money or hurt people to have this happen. So yeah, if everyone goes out and buys this, then maybe we can get that. So that would be good. Get on that, everyone.
Yeah.
So those are the things. And the other thing I've read, which isn't a romance, but it's the first in a Indian murder mystery series set in the 1920s in Bangalore, which obviously total catnip. And it's with an Indian, because quite often when you get these murder mysteries, you know, for example, the Abhay Mukherjee's books, which are excellent, and the Sam Wyndham mysteries, and you've got a white detective, white English detective, and then the Indian sidekick, and you've got a lot of culture clash. But this one, what I particularly liked about it was the heroine and is Indian, her sidekick is her doctor husband, who is also Indian, and it's not foregrounding a white character to be relatable or whatever. It's absolutely just about these people, although they are still dealing with the Raj and still dealing with, you know, those weird white people around them, basically. So yeah, I enjoyed that. I didn't think it was perfect. I thought the writing could have really done with a lot more editing, but it was a lively mystery and the heroine was great. And that's called The Bangalore Detectives Club by Harini.
Can I ask you a quick question though? How do you find, I mean, like, I'm fascinated by the fact that you found books in the Chinese dynasty, romance books, and in India and things like that. So like, how are you finding these like very diverse books with diverse settings and diverse characters? I find that very difficult.
Sorry, that was just indicating to my daughter not to be there. How am I finding that? You know, once you start looking, it's really easy to find them. It's one of those things I often see people going, how do I find these books? And okay, you follow the authors who write them, and then on like Twitter or whatever, and see who follows them and talks to them. And when you read, yeah, there's always a blog post with 20 interesting diverse books, or 20 books by Indian authors, or 20 books by African authors. And I skim through those and I will just, you know, make a note of anything that's interesting. But it's one of the, so about 5 years ago, I looked at my Goodreads, because I've been using that to track my reading for a while, and I noticed that it was like the entire page that I could see was basically white men, or white women, but mostly white men. And I thought, well, that sucks. And I actually set myself a target that I would have, like, any time the top 20 books I had last read would be 50% minimum not white men. You know, I have nothing against white men. I'm married to one. I'm the daughter of one, you know, but in order to diversify my reading, I realised I had to work at it. It wasn't just going to happen of its own accord, because the world is not structured to make it happen. And it's one of those things that as soon as you put the work in, it actually, you put the spade work in initially, and then it just becomes a rolling thing. My feed is now constantly full of fascinating recommendations of, here is another 20 new books by African authors, and here is this fantastic, yeah, there's a newsletter I subscribe to that gives me all the books by British Asian authors that are coming out in the next quarter. And, you know, skim through them, put them in your list.
Excellent.
But
okay.
Anyone who is interested and who's got a Goodreads or story, what is it, Thingy Shelf? I forget the other one that isn't Goodreads. But, you know, you look at your top 20 and you just count them up. And that is really an exercise worth doing. Count up actually what you have read. And if there's sub-story graph, thank you. And if it looks really, really weighted in one direction, then maybe weight it in the other direction. But you do have to put the work in. It's not you know this, you're a library director. It's something you have to balance your collection.
Yes. Absolutely. And the reading and giving people the opportunity to expand their horizons if they want to.
Yeah. So, but you know, expanding your horizons, my reading has been so energized by that. You know, romance is so much more interesting when you're reading diversely, because, you know, a lot, you know, the cliche everyone says about romance, oh, it's all the same story. Well, it's not, though, if you're reading diversely. then it becomes a completely different story. And you're telling, oh, yeah, like I loathe Jane Austen, right? And I loathe Jane Austen retellings. And I have always said that I'm, the one romance author who cannot stand Jane Austen, can't bear her, will not read a Pride and Prejudice retelling. But Esma Jaludin, I don't know if I got the name right, but Aisha at Last,
yes,
which is a Pride and Prejudice. But the hero is a really fundamentalist Muslim who won't shake women's hands, and he's a hero. You actually understand why, and he's in the Darcy role, and you see why, and it really works. And it's the only Pride and Prejudice retelling that I've ever loved or cared about or wanted to read, but because it did something really interesting with that premise, and it showed me a whole different new perspective. It was terrific.
Yeah, I love that too.
Yeah,
okay, so I'm going to go back to something you said just a minute ago about Twitter, because that's where I find almost all of your book recommendations, and you've had a flurry of them recently. What have you really enjoyed?
Oh, I'm just looking at what I have been reading recently. I tell you, so one of the things I've been doing recently, I did, the 12 book challenge that has been going around. So I did that last year, where you just get 12 randos. You just say, recommend me 12 book random people who are in my stream, and then write them down and then read them. And I did that last year, and it was absolutely amazing. I didn't like at all 4 of them, and 4 of them I thought were heavily flawed, and 4 of them were absolutely jaw-droppingly good. And the 2 that really stand out, I wrote them down and everything. So there's a 19th century novel by Brazil's greatest novelist, The Posthumous Memoirs of Brás Cubas, which is literally written by him. The viewpoint character who writes the book after he's dead, and he's sitting there going, the worms are eating me. It's absolutely fantastic. Really, it's one of those incredibly stylistically interesting books. There's a chapter that's made up of nothing but ellipses. He's really messing about. It's tremendous fun, and I went off and read everything I could get my hands on by the author, who is Machado de Assis. But everyone should read that. It should be one of those books that's canon, basically. Don't read Ulysses, read The Posthumous Memoirs of Brás Cubas. And then I also read The Devourers by Indra Das, which is a werewolf book, but it's set in the Mughal Empire. And it's quite brutal. There's an on-page rape, and there's a lot of body horror. But that's not normally my kind of thing, but it's just so good. And it's very visceral, and it's very sweaty, but it's got so much to say about colonialism and horror, and it's just awfully well written. So absolutely love that. That said, I'm doing a 12 book challenge this year, and I've hated everything so far. It's terrible, I know. So I've read 3 of them. I keep noping out and going, oh no, I hate this. So I think I just chose really bad books.
So when you have a book that you don't like, do you kind of know it immediately and you put it aside, or do you try to finish it?
That's a really good question. So I'm becoming more of an early DNFer, and there is actually my record now stands because I bought a romance novel and I opened it, and it was literally along the lines of, okay, said the Duke as his valet put on his cravat, and I was just like, no. So it was literally the first line. Excuse me, sorry. But no, I'm
more of that drink you just had.
Yeah, I'd love more of that drink. I think I'd had COVID the other week, so I'm still very coffee, I'm afraid. But actually, I still persist more than I should. I've just read one of the Adrian Tchaikovsky's latest fantasy, actually, and Adrian Tchaikovsky is one of my favourite authors, and especially with sci-fi. Have you read Children of Ruin, Children of Time? Okay, so this is amazing. They're these science fiction books, and there's a world where basically they try to genetically engineer, terraform a new world. But due to a slight malfunctioning, instead of the people getting all this amazing terraforming stuff, we got a race of giant spiders that got like all the genetic engineering. So you've basically got giant spiders. I'm not a spider person, but you've got all these giant spiders, and then people land on this planet which is full of giant intelligent spiders. It's absolutely glorious. It's so good. So Tchaikovsky is one of my favorite science fiction writers, and I've liked his fantasy so far. And then his latest fantasy and I got to 75%. I made myself to get 75%, and then I just had to admit to myself that I wasn't enjoying it, which is gutting when it's one of your favourite authors. But sometimes you just have to say, you know what, this is just not my book.
Right.
And there was a point where me and this author have diverged, and there it is. So, you know, I will still be out there for his next one, because he is really one of the most exciting and interesting writers out there. But, you know, sometimes it doesn't work.
Right. Exactly. I was just curious because I used to never not finish a book. I'd always like slog through it no matter what.
No, life's too short. Exactly. And I was cross with myself because I kept going. And actually, I have been doing that because I kept going because I wanted to enjoy this book. And I can actually see why it would be a really good book for other people, but just not for me. And then, like I say, with this 12-book challenge, all of the books so far have just not really been great for me. And I forced myself to finish Kindred by Rebecca Ragg Sykes, which is about the Neanderthal culture. And, you know, it's received loads of plaudits, and it's all about what Neanderthal culture was like. And I read through the whole thing doggedly, and it took me about 5 days. And you've got to bear in mind that I read the whole Lord of the Rings trilogy in 1 day. So this book took me 5 days. And I came to the end, and I just went, you know what? I don't care about prehistory. Sorry, I don't care. I just don't care. What, they chip things out of bone? Brilliant. Congratulations. Can we move on? So I'm afraid I've just discovered I've got a massive blind spot. And I have got to just accept that I need to stop reading books about prehistoric civilizations, because they just upset me.
Good to know. Okay, so what have you liked? You know,
what have I liked? So last year's reading, I was looking back at the things that absolutely blew me away out of last year. I loved Terry Pratchett. His assistant for years, Rob Wilkins, wrote a biography of him, which is, if you're a Terry Pratchett fan, you absolutely must read it. It's interesting on the writing of the books, but actually what it mostly is the assistant's just grief and pain at having to watch him go through Alzheimer's. And yeah, he had a very, very bad form of Alzheimer's. And basically I was in floods of tears at the end. And it's very, very stark and quite traumatized, in fact. But, you know, you just, you regret it. You regret that this horrible disease exists, and you regret the brilliance of Terry Pratchett and his passing, and how much we lost and how much we never got. So yeah, that's a wonderful book. If you like Pratchett at all, you ought to read the biography. Red Blossom in Snow, which is one of the Pink Ang Lee mysteries by Jeannie Lynn. Delilah Green Doesn't Care. Oh my goodness, Delilah. Have you read that? Amazing. It's an FF by Ashley Herring Blake, and it is a wonderful, I think it's the best FF novel I read last year. Wonderful romance, which is just bursting with enthusiasm. It's about a really quite a stroppy woman and a single mum, and they fall in love. But it's wonderfully just enthusiastic and bouncy and full of life and love, and absolutely terrific book. I did not like the sequel, regrettably, but Delilah Green Doesn't Care is one of the absolutely glorious. And then I went into this obsessive thing of reading 1950s novels by a completely forgotten novelist by Manning Coles, which I still can't explain even to myself, but I read 15 of them in a row. So, you know, can't really justify that one. Nobody else should do this. It's weird.
Oh, but there must be something there that like intrigued you to like read that many.
Oh yeah, no, totally. They're actually marvelous, because they are basically, the first ones are written in the 1940s, but they're being published directly after they were written. So in fact, the first one was written before the Second World War, and it's a spy novel written by an actual spy There's a spy collaborating with a woman journalist. So the first one is about what it was like to be a spy in the First World War and to be a double agent, and he's pretending to be a German, and it's actually quite traumatic and distressing. It's really good and very vivid. And then they sort of turned a minor character into the major character of the series and have him like doing all this stuff in the Second World War, which involves a whole lot of messing about with timescales, because in the first book, by the Second World War, he'd have been about 60, and suddenly he goes back to being about 30, and then he stays about 30 until about 1960 in the way of these things. But they have this premise that he gets amnesia and he forgets that he's who he is, and he wakes up in Germany, he speaks fluent German, and he actually becomes a high up in the Nazi party, and he doesn't remember who he is. But of course it's being written by Brits at the point where people didn't realise what was going on. So he's sitting there going, oh well, Goebbels isn't very nice because he's just not a very nice man. And then of course the later books, you see all the actual reality crashing down as people are finding out what was actually going on. So it's sort of like watching people discover horror in real time. So they're good spy stories in themselves, but they're also fascinating historical artifacts.
Wow.
So yeah, but they are enormously fun spy stories, and they've got a really interesting queer coded couple who appear in 3 of the books, who are basically, for some reason, and I would love a psychologist to explain this one, the authors use for a sort of shorthand for intense homoerotic relationships, making model trains. Exactly. They've got loads of characters who make model trains and have intense homosocial, very strong bonds, and you're like, okay, that's an interesting association. But they've got this pair of model train makers who just basically go around causing havoc and being freelance psychopaths, and are incredibly queer coded, and it's really interesting. So if you love mid-century pulp that's completely unjustifiable, Manning Coles is where you're at.
Gotcha.
I'm not saying I'm going to recommend it to people. I think that would be a step too far, but I enjoyed them enormously. So I'm just looking at what else. I will also say now, there's a bunch of books on my TBR. So I was looking at my pre-orders because I thought, let's see what I am actually looking forward to. And Jackie Lau, Not My Valentine, that's coming out next month. And I love Jackie Lau's writing. I mean, she's so exciting and she's always interesting. She's always got a good story. And, she's one of the people who's not afraid to talk about realities. So, she's one of the few people I can think who's got a heroine who had an abortion and it's not a big deal, she just had an abortion kind of thing. And I'm really glad that she's now got sort of publishing deals. Not My Valentine is out with the publisher, and I'm greatly looking forward to that. And then there's a book called The Detective coming out, which I don't know if you've seen these. Ajay Chowdhury, who British Asian writer, and he wrote a book called The Waiter, which is about a disgraced detective from India who's come to England, and he was working in a curry restaurant in Brick Lane, which is, the cheap sort of basic, and he starts solving crimes basically. So it's a detective story, but the first one he's called it's The Waiter, and then the second one is The Cook, and the third one is The Detective. So he's kind of like clawing his way back up the social scale. So I'm greatly looking forward to that. And then there's a science fiction that I'm also really excited about called The Surviving Sky by Kritika Rao. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but that's like a science fantasy, and I love science fantasy, when you've really got the blend of magic and science and technology, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff that goes on there. So this one is about floating plant cities, which just sounds marvelous. But the book I'm really excited about coming out next year is one I'm not going to talk about because it's published by HarperCollins. And as we know, the HarperCollins editorial and the workers, the union staff, are on strike, and they have asked us not to cross the digital picket line by promoting HarperCollins books or reviewing HarperCollins books. And I noticed that at the end of last year when I was doing I do a regular roundup on my blog of what I've been reading. And normally I list about like 12 romance novels that I've loved. And this time I took out all of the HarperCollins ones and I was left with about 6. And it's absolutely shocking how much, it's shocking and it's depressing. I think romance in particular should be really shouting because HarperCollins staff have now been on strike for more than 2 months, and HarperCollins will not go to the negotiating table for their incredibly reasonable demands. So I'm afraid I'm not going to tell you what the really exciting book I'm desperate to read is, because it's being published by HarperCollins. I'm going to buy it because they've said don't boycott the books, but I am not going to promote it. And this situation sucks. Beverly Jenkins is published by HarperCollins. I haven't reviewed the latest Beverly Jenkins. I want to be sitting there shouting about the latest Beverly Jenkins, but this isn't fair. This is not right on the authors, and it's not right on the staff, and the whole thing stinks. So anyone who's listening to this and hasn't yet sent a message to HarperCollins, please do, because the more of us shout out, the better on this. So
I love it. I love that you have that camaraderie with your authors, even though you're not published by HarperCollins, you're going to support them. I appreciate
and I'm not submitting to HarperCollins. I've got a book which my agent is putting out on submission very soon, and it's not going to HarperCollins because we're not going to do that. But it sucks for authors, sucks for the staff, sucks for everyone. And for what? For an absolute pittance. And this company is owned by Rupert Murdoch, who's one of the richest men in the world. They could actually afford to pay their staff. So, this whole thing is contemptible. But yes, sorry, I just needed to get that off my chest.
We have people in the audience that are with you too. Do you mind if I ask a writing question?
Yeah, go for it.
More. If it's okay to ask it, how do you make your characters sound different from each other in dialogue, but especially when alternating point of view narration?
Well, you know what? They sound different because they're different people. I mean, you've got to, once you're thinking, it would be more difficult if you had people who are from exactly the same background, but I've found that I rarely write people from exactly the same background. If you've got a different point of view, a different upbringing, a different class, potentially a different race, different gender, whatever, if you look at where they're coming from, then where they're at is, it's a very different place. So their voices are a very different place. And one of the things I really liked about, so the book I've got coming out, The Secret Lives of Country Gentlemen, Joss is a smuggler and Gareth is a nobleman, although he used to be a clerk. But actually, although Gareth is supposedly socially vastly superior to Joss, they're on Rumley Marsh, which is a very remote part of England, and Joss is actually the boss of the entire area and everyone listens to him, and Gareth is this newcomer and nobody's interested in him. So the who can be confident and who can be powerful and who's got the social clout and who feels insecure related to who is constantly flipping back and forth. And that's the kind of thing I really enjoy writing, because we've all got our securities and our insecurities, and digging into both of those is quite good.
Well, we noticed that, and we talked about it probably in our first time we talked about how we found that in the Magpie Charm series and in the Seditious Affair by the book, not the series necessarily, but just that power differential. And when you were talking about the books that you are reading and recommending, I also found that the voices that you're talking about are very, very interesting. Like there's no rhyme or reason, it seems, for how you pick your books.
No, there isn't. There really isn't. I operate on whim. I have a whim of iron, as they say. But what I do, I buy an unjustifiable number of books, and I have a TBR folder on my Kobo. And at the moment, I've got a 12-book challenge, so all the books that I'm intending to read on that. And it's, I will just sort of skim through that and go, whatever that one. So, but I like that it's completely different. I like that I can be in whatever mood, and there is something in my TBR folder that will suit the mood, whether it's a serious non-fiction book or a ridiculous frothy romance, or a big involving fantasy. I think the variety is what keeps me going, basically. Nothing good ever happens if I read too many of the same books in a row. I have learned that about myself. It's actually quite important that I have to kick myself out of it. Apart from Manning Coles, where I did read 15.
And I know you
But I've
read,
stopped now. I'm over it.
what did that take you, like 2 days? Because I know you're a fast reader.
It didn't take me long, actually, although they are quite short. But mostly, yeah, no, I just went on a shopping glom. It was just disgraceful. I've got no excuse.
We've all been there, so we get it. So do you read, what kind of books do you read when you're writing? Do you read completely different kinds of books?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't end up reading a lot of romance when I'm writing when I'm really in the throes of a book, because you don't want to start borrowing by accident, basically. And also then I can save up all the romances I want to read for a treat when I finish the first draft, and I can just binge a huge number, and that's a good feeling. I read a lot of related non-fiction, and actually I read a lot of related fiction, and that's part of the Manning Coles binge, is that I've got a 1950s series percolating in my head. So I really wanted to read a whole lot of 1950s thrillers to get me in the mood. So I'll do a lot of that. But yeah, I do deep non-fiction dives. Which is great, actually, because I find non-fiction is one of the things that frees my brain up. If I read an entire book about the semicolon, which I have done, or an entire book about whatever weird, random, incredibly specific thing, it lets part of the rest of your brain go, if you see what I mean. So
yeah, that makes sense. See, other than the 1950s series, what else might be on the horizon or percolating?
Well, so I've got the sequel to The Secret Life of Country Gentlemen, which comes out in March. The sequel to that comes out in November, and that's set about 13 years later, also on Romney March, which is that's quite interesting. That's a slightly different book, but they're both very much set in remote places. And then I am writing at the moment a new Regency novel, which is either going to be a Duke book or it isn't. You'd hope, given my delivery date is April, that I'd know more than that, but it's not
a very binary kind of situation.
Yeah, yes. Well, I wrote 60,000 words for the Duke book, and then the problem I have, you see, is I write a novel and I get 60,000 words, and then I go, this is the worst book ever written, I'm a complete hack and I have no talent, and this book is terrible. And then, generally speaking, I get over it, but I haven't got over it with this one. So at the moment it's with an extremely trusted book doctor who I have worked with before. And I'm hoping she's going to come back and go, no, it's fine. But there's every possibility that she's going to come back and go, no, it's the worst book ever written. And I have no way of judging this because I'm at 60,000 words on a book and I have no judgment. So I have in fact started writing a second book just in case. So either it's going to be a Duke book and the Duke book worked, or it's not, in which case it's going to be actually about a guy who makes paint. Because I am fascinated by old and forgotten trades. And before about 1840, paints had to be hand ground and created for artists quite directly by people whose job, they were called oil and colour men, and they would make the watercolours and the paints and deliver them to the painters. And they would make them of all kinds of stuff, many of which poisonous, but including, for example, mummy brown. Guess what mummy brown was made of? Dirt. No, seriously.
Dirt?
Mummies. Oh. Literally mummies. People were literally taking Egyptian mummies and grinding them up to make brown paint. I'm not kidding about this. And it didn't strike anyone as being absolutely horrifying until about 1870. Until that time, like Rembrandt used mummy brown.
So they were grave robbing and making...
The Westerners were basically nicking bodies from Egyptian tombs, shipping them over, grinding them up, and turning them into paint. And in about 1915, there's a quote from a paint manufacturer saying that they probably still have an arm hanging around somewhere. So they don't make mummy brown anymore, but we've still got an arm in case anyone needs it. What? Seriously? But yeah, So Oil and Colour Man, I'm fascinated. And this is one of those rabbit holes that I've just gone straight down. So that book's going to happen, definitely.
Well, a couple of people in the chat are like, yep, we're in for the oil and paint guy story.
Well, I wrote a taxidermist a few years ago, and I have to say, everyone loved the taxidermist. I love the taxidermist. It's one of the most interesting books I've ever written. Huge deep dive into taxidermy, Victorian taxidermy. Absolutely fascinating subject. Quite niche, I will grant you, quite niche. But, people did these things. So...
But don't you think that, and I know we're getting away from the TBR discussion, but this is so fascinating. Don't you think that romance especially allows for such an accessible way to learn these things?
Yes.
You've done the research, right? And we get to
Yes, exactly. Romance is one of the best genres for this, because if you're in anything else, there's got to be a different overarching plot. If you're in a detective novel, and you had an oil and colour man, whatever, there's a murder mystery. So everything would be dedicated to, oh right, and then he used orpiment, and orpiment is like a deadly poison. So clearly he's a poisoner, and that's the end of the story. And romance doesn't have to do that. Romance, you can just have a character who is an oil and colour man because you want to. It doesn't have that sort of plot imperative quality that a lot of other genre fiction has. So you can roll around in interesting things and have fun with it in a way that is incredibly liberating. And I've just been reorganizing the bookshelves in my shed, and I have a writing shed, and I bought 2 extra bookshelves because I thought either I could throw some books away, or I could face reality and not throw some books away and just buy 2 extra bookcases. Yeah. And I've got all my books in beautiful order now, which is absolutely marvelous. And I'm looking at and just these staggering niche things, and people who've done these incredible deep dives into tiny, but they've gone so deep into it. And I don't know anywhere else where I could just roll around in this and have so much fun as romance. Because romance, I mean, Kate Claiborne, Love Lettering, that's a romance novel about a calligrapher, and you don't have to have a massive literary heft and fit meaning to the fact she's a calligrapher. We can just enjoy her being a calligrapher. And we can learn a whole lot about calligraphy just because. So yes, absolutely. It's one of the things I love most about writing romance.
And that's, I think, for me as a reader, one of the best things about it too, because I love the romance part, but I also learn something in almost every book. So
yeah, definitely. And Beverly Jenkins, again, she does just so much research, and most of my understanding of American history pretty much comes from her. Because she does this great research, and she really humanizes it, and you can actually you feel the living history there.
Absolutely. And that, that's how I've learned about history in a lot of countries. People think I'm nuts, but I'm like, I got it from a romance book. It's true.
Yeah, everything I know about the Philippines pretty much comes from, the romance class authors who are out there, all writing fascinating, and you're just absorbing stuff about another culture in this entirely painless way. And I love it. I love the fact that romance authors have such a wide and interesting variety of interests, because I am basically interested in everything except prehistory, I've discovered.
Well, I hear that like people in the chat are like, oh, now I need to know about the oil and paint man. But I think the interesting thing here is that for me is that when you do research and you put it into a book, you know how we talk about romance tropes and things like that, it makes somebody else could do the same research and come back with something else. And that adds, like, we can read those 2 books and learn 2 completely different things about that same topic.
Yes, completely. And you can read an awful lot of novels, and sometimes you just won't come across, like, you can read a lot of Regency novels without learning that the only British Prime Minister who's ever been assassinated was assassinated during the Regency. That's it's a thing.
That I do not know.
No, well, exactly. But the things you put in, the things you leave out, kind of thing. They're always it's what makes life interesting. I think that's actually why I'm very interested. There's a lot of, or I say a lot, but there's more Jewish historical romance coming up than has been previously the case. Mm-hmm. And one of them, actually, Rose Lerner, Sailor's Delight. I don't know. I read that a couple of months ago, and I said basically it feels like it fits in the Aubrey and Maturin series by Patrick O'Brien. It's amazingly well researched. It's super convincing. It's it's got a wonderful sense of place and a wonderful knowledge. Rose Lerner's research is always absolutely on point. I mean, she did the brilliant Listen to the Moon, which is about a butler and a serving maid, and no upper class people need apply. And then this one, it's an romance about a ship's agent who dealt with the money that basically paying the naval officers for the ships that they had captured, which is all quite complicated. And then I can't remember the name now, but one of the sailors who does the stuff with sextants and the astrolabes, the navigator. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. Mm-hmm. And the ship's agent is Jewish, and it's all about being Jewish in London during the Regency period, and it's just this whole new light, glorious. And there's a lovely, very understated slow burn romance with it. What is not to like? Everything is better with a lovely understated slow burn romance.
I agree. So I'm just going to do a quick shout out to let everybody here know that we are hosting Kate Claiborne in February.
Oh, lovely.
For a Q&A, and a partner library of ours is hosting Olivia Waite and Rose Lerner also in February.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I'll put that in the recap for everybody when I send out an email. I know you have to go to a rugby game, so we have one last question, which I think is really awesome. Because at a previous webinar, this person asked you about TV and film adaptations, and you were intriguingly mysterious. So we wonder if there's any updates you could talk about.
No, I'm still intriguingly mysterious. Unfortunately, the interestingly possible thing sort of kicked in around. I have sold rights, but whether that goes anywhere. So what I've learned about TV is basically first you sell the rights, and then there's about 4 more stages of development before anything whatsoever happens. And of course, everything has been slowed down by COVID. So I'm afraid still intriguingly mysterious because nothing's happened. We're in the same place. I live in hope though, because there are some wonderful adaptations coming up and people who are looking to take more things. So cross fingers.
We do have our fingers crossed because we love your books, and so many of them would lend so well to the screen. I think. I
like to think so. TV people, please listen.
Well, if we can write a letter or something, let us know. Because we're writing to HarperCollins anyway, so we might as well write to the TV people.
Write to HarperCollins first. That's the important one.
Okay. Well, we did get some interesting information about the strike in the chat, so I will be paying attention to that.
Good. Yes. Do not boycott the books, but do the digital boycott on the promotion, and do let HarperCollins know that you think they suck.
That I can do. So like I said, I know you have to get to a rugby game, and I don't want to keep you from that, but I do want to thank you again just for your generosity in doing this with me over and over again. And with so many great book recommendations, but also such great insight into why we read what we read, and have a huge pile sitting by our bedside.
It is always a pleasure. I love doing this, so I'm always happy to do it. It's enormous fun.
Great. Well, I will send you another email for the next 6 months, and hopefully it won't be as you're heading out to a rugby game.
Yes, and if everyone could just root for the Saracens, because this is quite an important match, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
All right, well, we're all with you. All right, everybody, thank you so much for being here, and we hope to see you very soon again for another awesome program with either a different author or in 6 months with KJ again.
Okay, fantastic. Cheers.
Right. Bye, everybody.
I like all the Go Saris people in the chat. Thank you very much.
People know what you're talking about. Good night, everybody.
Bye.